So in the last lesson, we were talking about Rachel Carson's book, about the methods in farming that she approves of, the methods of controlling pests, such as biological control, in which natural predators are used, and organic farming, in which plants are grown without the use of synthetic chemicals and fertilizers. And then she talks about the importance of crop rotation, that is, not planting the same crop over and over again, the use of natural fertilizers, and other sustainable practices. So we can see that her book was really futuristic, and she knew that these were the ideas that would be needed in the future. And in spite of it, her voice was shut, and the book was banned for several years, as I mentioned. Her legacy is being credited with launching the environmental movement, the climate change movement. She inspired the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency and other environmental legislation, which is quite strong in America. Unlike in India, that protection of environment is quite strong, especially if it's related to the food that is consumed. In foreign countries, people are so much alert to about where the food is coming from. We have something like free range cows, free range milk, free range eggs. So what are these? These are from animals that are not part of the industry, which are brought up and which graze on open farms. They are not injected with chemicals and hormones. So people there have a choice about what kind of food they want to eat, what kind of eggs they want. Do they want organic or do they want free range eggs? There is a lot of encouragement there to buy from local farmers markets, which is very common there. The farming community has relevance and significance over there, as the people in the West become more and more about healthy food. So they are encouraged to buy their grocery from farmers markets that are there on certain days of the week, where the food comes directly from the farms, and not to shop in the malls and department stores where the food travels, miles and miles by train or by truck. And of course, food that has come by aeroplanes, which has traveled hundreds of miles, that is discouraged. So there are two things here: to help and encourage the local farmer, and to retain the nutrients of one's food, which is brought fresh from the farm, and also to have a sustainable attitude towards environment, to encourage that natural food. So these are the ideas that Silent Spring brings to us, and which are followed in many countries in the West. There is a lot of awareness, which hopefully should be there in India also as time passes and we learn more and more about climate change. Silent Spring is a powerful call to action against environmental degradation. So Carson's work underscores the importance of respecting natural systems and the interconnectedness of all life. So there is a respect for nature, there is an importance given to the ecosystem, which is not a dead mechanism, but it is a living thing with living connections. And one loop in the chain, if it is broken, then there is problem all around. So she recognized the interconnectedness of all life. All life is important. The book remains relevant today, related to issues of pesticide use, environmental abuse, and the need for sustainable ways of agriculture, which continues to be a critical global concern today. It serves us as a reminder of the need for vigilance and responsibility in our treatment of the environment. It makes us aware that what we give is what we will get back. We are so deeply connected to our environment and to nature. So it really reflects us. What we give to it will come back to us in the cycle. The other important writer who talks about climate change in his non-fiction and fiction is Amitav Ghosh. So his book, The Great Derangement, Climate Change and the Unthinkable, is an important work. And we see the title that is so meaningful, The Great Derangement. What is this derangement? Derangement is another word for madness, mentally being unstable or unsound. So what is the derangement that is afflicting us? It is a madness for power, for wealth, for accumulation of riches, for making a very wealthy and comfortable life for ourselves, and in this way ruining the environment around us. So the great derangement, climate change and the unthinkable. The unthinkable is we still do not know the worst consequences that will come out of this climate change. It is unthinkable. One has to be sensitive to what is happening in nature. So there are two meanings in unthinkable. We do not know the reach of the damage that we have done. That is unthinkable. And again, unthinkable, you can't think of it in terms, you can't calculate it. It's unthinkable. It's rather something you ought to feel. You ought to have some emotion and feeling. So it does not come in the area of just thinking and reasoning. One has to feel also for the environment. So this is a title which is very meaningful. It addresses the issue of climate change and examines how contemporary culture struggles to comprehend and respond to this crisis. And there are various facets in this novel. If it talks about climate change, it talks about literature too. It talks about how literature itself has neglected climate and nature for a long time. It talks about the Anthropocene, how human beings have centered themselves and how that is reflected in literature. For example, if we think of the works of the 17th, 18th century British literature, conquest of nature was very important. If we think about this famous novel, Moby Dick, the killing of a sea animal, the killing of a whale was important for victory. So in the same way, when we read this award-winning American author of the 20th century, Ernest Hemingway, there is this novel by him, The Old Man and the Sea. So the whole novel is about catching the biggest fish possible. His age and his weakness are there, but he does manage to catch the biggest fish. So this kind of competition out to catch nature, to attack it, to beat it, this kind of thing Ghosh mentions is what it means to decenter nature and center human beings. And the current climate change ideas or the current climate fiction is about decentering human beings and bringing the nature into the center. So Ghosh is an acclaimed Indian author. He is known for his historical works, for his non-fiction and for his fiction too. There are various things that he is writing about. His books are about the post-colonial India also, but nature is also there in some of the places, and all these things are, these problems and issues are interlinked. So The Great Derangement is a non-fiction book that explores the cultural and political challenges posed by climate change. It is the first book to bring out the close relationship between literature and climate change. So as I mentioned, he brings out the relationship between literature and climate change, and he gives us a very long list of books in the 21st century that are dealing with climate change and its various facets. The structure of the book. Part 1, Stories. Through stories, he examines the role of contemporary fiction in addressing climate change. He argues that modern literature fails to engage with the realities of climate change due to its focus on individual human experiences. So, as I just gave an example, it was always in earlier literatures, it was always a conquest of nature. Man was victorious by conquering forest or killing tigers or catching fish. It was always like that. And I remember in Hemingway, the idea, there's a comparison between man and animal, that man is a fighter who never gives his enemy a chance, whereas when animals fight, they give a clean chance to their victims. So it's all about violence, and human beings, their relationship with animals is defined by violence. Hemingway was into bullfighting also. So all these things, these ideas have been examined by Amitav Ghosh. He argues that modern literature fails to engage with the realities of climate change because of the centering of human beings. Nature is sidelined. Part 2, History. He discusses the historical factors that have led to the current environmental crisis. He explores the impact of colonialism and industrialization on the environment. So he brings about the nexus between industrialization and imperialism and colonialism, which have led to this state of the environment. So in one of his books, The Sea of Poppies, he talks about indentured labor. In another book, he talks about how when the British ruled over India, they destroyed the crops that the farmers grew. So indigo, and so there was something called opium, and opium was grown in the fields forcibly, and the natural crop of the farmers in Bihar, that was restricted and removed. That ruined the soil, and that brought great profit for the British people, for the rulers, because all the hard work on preparing the opium from the flowers, that was done by the farmers and the labor force, and these people, because they were not allowed to grow their own crops, they became poorer and poorer, and they got submerged in loans for generations. So this was their plight, and then the opium was sold from the poppy flowers. It was converted into opium and it was sold at high rates in the international market. So whereas the imperialists grew richer and richer, the native became poorer and poorer. So there was this nexus between colonialism, industrialization, and imperialism. Everything in connection with the other ruined the environment. Part 3, Politics. He analyzes the political dimensions of climate change, critiques the failure of global political institutions to effectively address the crisis. So he tries to bring in some very relevant points related to climate change, whether it's history or whether it's politics or whether it's literature, and therefore this book is a seminal work that informs us about various aspects of climate change. The major themes in this book are critiques of contemporary culture, particularly literature, for not adequately addressing climate change. He suggests that traditional narrative forms are ill-suited to represent the scale and complexity of climate crisis. So, as far as climate crisis is concerned, there is so much difference of its impact in different countries, in different parts of the world. So, one solution cannot fit all. It is complex, and traditional narrative forms cannot summarize the scale and the complexity of this crisis. So, it is something that is very complex and very difficult to put into some form of traditional narrative or traditional political narrative. There are so many sides to it. Literature is uniquely equipped to capture the uniqueness of culture. Thus, if it is something happening in Africa, the literature there will tell us about the climate problems and the unique features of it. So, in India, it is maybe a different kind of problem, and literature will convey that problem. So, it is something very individual to that country and culture and very complex. So, uniform agendas and generalizations do not work. Historical responsibility. He explores how historical processes, especially colonialism and the Industrial Revolution, have contributed to environmental degradation. He highlights the uneven distribution of climate change impacts, with poorer nations bearing the brunt. So, we discussed this earlier also, that it's the third world countries that bear the brunt of all the climate atrocities and the climate exploitation that is going on in Western countries or in developed countries. So, in affluent countries, there are escapes too from the anger and the fury of climate, but it's not so in poorer countries. So, they bear the brunt of all the luxuries that the richer countries have, all the indulgences that the richer countries have. He sees that there is a political failure to sort of take action against climate change. He examines the inability of political systems to respond effectively to climate change. He discusses the influence of corporate interest and neoliberal policies on climate inaction. So, later on, we would talk about climate activism and how it helps change public policy or how it turns government policy. Key arguments. Literary challenge. Ghosh argues that the novel as a literary form is primarily focused on individual human experiences and thereby struggles to represent the collective and non-linear nature of climate change. He calls for new narrative forms that can capture the scale of environmental crisis. Imperialism and climate. The book links the climate crisis to historical imperialist practices that exploited natural resources and disregarded environmental consequences. He highlights how these practices have created a legacy of environmental destruction and social inequality. So, he aims at enlightening us about the idea of climate justice, that the problems are not the same everywhere, and therefore justice is needed to help those who are suffering, those who are the weakest and who need help. So, justice should be given to them. So he is also talking about climate justice. Neoliberalism and climate change. The book critiques neoliberal economic policies for prioritizing profit over environmental sustainability. It discusses how market driven approaches have failed to address the root causes of climate change. So, we already know that market economy drives so many things, and so much of a part of our lives is governed by the market now. And when we do shopping on Amazon, and we can get our needs fulfilled immediately, whether you want a dress or you want some kind of food or you want some kind of furniture, you get it immediately. But that shopping, how how does it sort of harm those involved in it? How does it harm the environment? The the carbon footprint of things that are sort of brought overseas through flights, all that as a loss. And then how does it affect the labor force? Is there justice to the people who deliver? What is their state in those factories and industries where these products are managed and these products are delivered? So, like, our entire life is now market driven. There are really few things that we can say are, ones in which we really have a choice. We really have no choice if we go by market. So I think the idea in the Western world of the farmers market is one example of open choice. At least you can eat what you want and you can choose the best thing for your health. But can you do it when you are in department stores or when you are shopping online? You have to take what is available, and that might not be the best for you. So, market driven economy is one of the challenges, before we can address climate change. There are case studies and examples that he gives, some of which are very interesting. Some of these examples tell us about the mighty force of nature, and that nature has a life and a soul of its own, and that we should not think that it is a dead mechanical tool that we use every day. So he talks about extreme weather events. He provides examples of extreme weather events such as floods and cyclones, and thus illustrates the impact of climate change. He discusses how these events disproportionately affect vulnerable populations. Urbanization and risk examines the risks associated with rapid urbanization in coastal areas, making them more susceptible to climate related disasters, discusses the need for sustainable urban planning and development. So, here also he does point out that the weather experts and meteorological departments, when they give statements or they give warnings that housing and construction should not be in certain areas, they should be followed. So, examples of this mass loss of lives in the earthquake in Turkey recently reveal this disobedience to what the experts have said or the warnings that they have given. So, in this he talks about this urban planning, how risky it is for the sake of market, for the sake of money. Locations are chosen which seem to be very exotic, like sea coasts, and then those sea coasts may be places that the experts have warned about, but then, well, the market force is such that maximum money will be made if those houses and those resorts can be sold. And so in times of climate crisis, these are the worst sufferers. These rich people who have taken these up, They are the worst sufferers, and this is a rare occasion where the poor people are not the sufferers, because the poorer people, as Ghosh says, they live in the interiors of the town or the city, in the ghettos, so they are spared this fury, and there's a richer people who face the fury of storms from the sea coast. So this was the case of Bombay that he was discussing. So he says that we need sustainable urban planning and development. So the current state of our cities and towns is such that there is very little margin given to the elderly or the disabled or the children. So urban planning should be such that everybody should have a space. Even the poor and the impoverished, they should also have a space. They should have spaces. So then there should be spaces of safety where one is not crossing the boundary as far as weather and climate is concerned. So earlier, in one of the earlier lessons also, I mentioned the recent forest fires in UK. The thing was that the experts had warned about not constructing habitation near the forest, but it was not listened to. Perhaps it was more beautiful, or perhaps it was cheaper, whatever the reasons were, that eventually led to damage, destruction and loss of lives. So Ghosh talks about sustainable urban planning and development, which should be for all and which should take nature into consideration. Another example comes into mind when we build smart cities and cyber cities and things like that, where those huge glass towers come up. Does one give space to nature anywhere? In these glittering glasses, in the reflections, so many birds die. They fly and they bump into the glass towers and they die. So this kind of selfishness about thinking only about the market or about the richer clients should not be there. It should be sustainable and it should be about justice for all. So as we already know, the case of habitat destruction, in which animals, when they lose their habitat, they move out of those areas and they come into the villages and the farms. So there is for the outlying areas of forest and all, which have been more or less shorn down and trees have been cut. So there are a lot of bear attacks in regions, or leopard attacks and wolf attacks, because these animals have lost their land and they do not know where to feed. They go for shelter and food and they turn into predators and man-eaters. So sustainable urban planning means giving nature also a chance to survive and also making human life healthy. He gives cultural and religious responses also. He explores how different cultures and religions perceive and respond to environmental challenges. He highlights the role of traditional ecological knowledge in addressing climate change. So the wisdom of the ancients is a powerful resource, and there are many things that can be learned from it, and even religious texts teach a lot. There are many texts in there are many religious texts which tell about keeping water pure, maintaining the sanctity of water, maintaining the sanctity and the purity of the earth, giving the animals their due, feeding ants, or giving the honeybees their lives, not to threaten them with extinction. So these cultural things that come from religion or religious beliefs are also very valuable, and literature, climate literature can really thrive on these elements, and in this way climate literature becomes very rich. He gives some solutions to cultural shift, calls for a cultural shift in how we perceive and respond to climate change. He advocates for new forms of storytelling that can capture the collective and interconnected nature of the crisis. He calls for political action, emphasizes the need for strong political action and leadership to address climate change. He advocates for policies that prioritize environmental sustainability and social justice. He talks about community engagement, highlights the importance of community engagement and grassroots movements in driving change. He encourages local initiatives and participatory approaches to environmental governance. So he talks about grassroots movements also. So I hope you were able to learn something about some important books related to climate change. Thank you. We will meet again in the next lesson.